Enjoy this Wild Soul Gathering production. I'm Dr. Sandra Marie. Pour yourself a really tall glass of spiritual curiosity and join me for the Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious podcast. In the spirit of happy hour, cheers to some new insights, peace, revitalization, and perhaps an aha moment that may change your life. Welcome to this episode of Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious, where we blend laughter, wisdom, and a splash of soul searching. Today we're diving into the world of mindful masculinity with a guest who's been called a cross between Dave Chappelle and Eckhart Tolle. I have to tell you, that really caught my attention. Imagine humor and spiritual enlightenment wrapped into one, and that's Scott Grace for you. Scott is here to shake it up, how we think about masculinity, mindfulness, and personal transformation. From his powerful book, Mindful Masculinity, a book for men and the women who love them, to his unique ability to turn life's biggest challenges into profound and often hilarious lessons. Scott brings a fresh, heart-opening perspective to the conversation. So if you are ready to laugh, learn, and maybe see the men in your life or yourself in a whole different light, you won't want to miss a second of this episode, seriously. Welcome to the show, Scott.
I am delighted to be here, Dr. Sandra Marie.
Scott, I have to tell you, I was listening to your book on Audible, and your humor and delivery really kept me engaged. Many chuckles and laughs while I was painting one of the rooms up at the farm here. But I have to tell you, I'm a big fan of Brené Brown, and listening to your book on Audible reminded me of Brené when I was literally laughing my ass off listening to her book, The Power of Vulnerability.
Oh, my. This is so exciting to me. I love Brené Brown.
Oh, awesome.
I dreamed of writing a book about vulnerability for men. When I was writing it, she was one of my ghostwriters, in a sense, guiding lights. Like, how can I get this across?
I'm going to tell you, I think that you hit a home run with that, because as I was listening to your book, it more than once took me back to Brené Brown and listening to The Power of Vulnerability. I love it. But before we get started on the book, I would like to ask you a little question so the listeners can get to know you just a little bit. I know that's always the part I think that the guest really, it's not their favorite part of the interview by any means.
But it's all right. I'll be patient.
Okay. So Scott, your journey from selling laundry bags on New York streets to becoming a transformational troubadour is fascinating. Can you just share a little bit about that journey and a pivotal moment that steered you toward this path that you're on now?
Sure. So when I was in high school in Brooklyn, New York, my best friend had a next-door neighbor who owned a laundry bag factory. And he said to us one day, when I was your age, I used to sell these bags on the street. I made more money in lunch hour, 12 to 2, than I make all day now owning a factory. Those were the days. And we both perked up because we wanted summer jobs. And the idea of working for ourselves, selling things on the street, wow. So he set us up. And my friend and I in Wall Street, New York City, were selling laundry bags during lunch hour. He got a ticket. The police caught him. It's kind of illegal. And I didn't, and I loved it. $50 in my pocket. I loved it. So I just kept going with it, and I went with it for 7 years.
Wow, that's a long time.
Now, meanwhile, while I was doing this, my parents were freaking out. I occasionally would get a ticket, donate my bags to the New York City. It was like my way of paying taxes. But I also got into jail, actually, for a weekend when they just felt like they had to lock us all up, all the peddlers.
Oh.
So it was quite a bumpy ride. While I was on the streets, I was taking voice lessons. I was writing songs. I was dreaming of becoming a singer-songwriter. I was taking all kinds of weekend workshops. I was taking all the money that I was making and throwing it into personal growth and recording studios. And it was a great time. And I was so into personal growth. It was my addiction. That's a pretty good addiction, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
So eventually, after 7 years, I took a leap and I moved from New York City to California with a commitment never to do anything for money that I didn't feel a calling to do.
Oh, wow.
No more stepping stones to my dream. I went to California and there was no more stepping stones, or so I thought. What's funny is after 6 months of selling of doing house concerts, workshops, all of the things I wanted to do, I came back to New York City to visit my parents. I did a house concert, and there was a woman looking at me. She was looking at me like she was in pain, trying to withdraw a memory from her memory bank, and the bank was closed. And so, at the end of the night, she came up to me and she shook my hand. She still had this dazed and confused look. And she said, "Oh, I know you from somewhere," which is like this Brooklyn, New York Jewish accent that I know from my household. And I knew exactly. I just knew it was intuition. And I said the words that I had said every day for 7 years loudly. It blew her away. I said, nylon jumbo laundry bags, machine washable, water resistant, the strongest laundry bag you can buy without a prescription. I was developing my creative skills out there on the street.
There you
And
go.
so she goes, "Oh my God, you're the laundry bag man. I used to walk by you every day. I felt so sorry for you. What happened? How did you become a singer?" And that was really cool. And then the other thing that happened is, this is the last thing I'll say about my background, okay?
Yep.
No, maybe the second to last. So the place that I sold the most laundry bags was Court Street, Brooklyn Heights, and there was a kosher pizzeria that I used to store my bags in and hide from the police. I used to run down. They were very friendly to me. I ate lunch there every day, so I would hide in the bathroom, and it was quite an experience. So I walked in there after 6 months of not seeing them, and they said, "Scott, you can't believe what a great week you picked to visit us. Take a look at the back page of the Brooklyn Heights Gazette." So I did. I opened it up, the local newspaper, and there was a caricature of me. And it said, "Whatever happened to the laundry bag man?"
Oh, wow. That is crazy. I just got chills down my
Yes.
spine when you say that. Wow.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
clearly you touched lives without realizing that you were touching lives.
I did. And I was developing my courage and my self-expression. And here's another funny thing about the laundry bag 6 months later is I got the urge to sell laundry bags while I was visiting my family for a week. I figured, hey, let me get out of the house and, you know, do it again, make some, quick cash and have some fun. The person who used to sell me the bags, I called him up. I said, "I want to get some laundry bags. I'm here in town and he said, no. I'm like, no? He said, "I know you moved to California to do your dream, and I'm not going to support you in going back
Wow.
in time."
That's beautiful. Gosh, what a friend. Like, that's so profound for someone to say.
Yeah. As I say it, it really touches me. It's like, wow, there's ways that the universe supports us that we're not ready to really take
Boy,
in,
that's the truth.
except maybe in hindsight.
Yeah, I think that that's very
That was
true.
one of those moments where I was like, right now, I'm like, wow, the universe closed that door.
And you weren't meant to step through it. There you go. It
Yeah.
served its purpose. Let's
Yeah.
move on to mindful masculinity.
Yeah. How did we get there from selling laundry bags?
There you go. You tackle some really serious topics with humor. How do you balance delivering profound messages while keeping the audience entertained? So that was a little bit of what we talked about when I told you I was listening to the Audible version, but I thought that takes a lot of talent and skill. I mean, you've opened for Robin Williams on the comedic side, and I know that you've opened for Marianne Williamson on the spiritual side. Like, you have these, that it's a duality that's actually not a duality. And I mean, they're just a few of the many. How do you do that?
I don't know how to answer that question, Sandra. It's like asking me who I am and what, how many years it's been. It was 60. I was 60 years old when I wrote that book. And so that's, let's say, 40 years of experience, both in the spirituality, personal growth work, as a life coach working with people, and as a clown, as a comedian, as an entertainer. So how did those two worlds get stitched together? It just did. It's like, I think it's part of my purpose to integrate those two worlds. And golly, I thank God that I have the gift, that I've developed it, and that I can hold people's attention with the entertainment while I am able to create some safety for them to look inside and be mindful about very, very intense subjects, because I make it fun.
It's a great vehicle and you do it well.
Let's do it. Let's do some of it now.
Okay, so in your view, what are the most harmful stigmas associated with traditional masculinity, and how can mindfulness dismantle them? Let's just get into the crux of the
Yeah, yeah.
subject.
The I would say the most damaging of the cultural stories around men and masculinity is the one that I think hurt me the most, which is, I'm not supposed to cry. And if I cry or express anything vulnerable, I am not being a man. And I felt a lot of shame about my feminine side, about feeling. I started feeling ashamed of being afraid at a very young age. I started being ashamed of being in sadness at a very young age. I learned that's not cool. So I became a caricature of a man rather than myself. Thanks to Tarzan, John Wayne, Clint Eastwood, James Bond, these are my role models. My father was a pretty cool guy. I saw him cry. He did not give me those messages, nor did my mom or my sisters. I got it from the culture and my friends and the schoolyard.
Wow, okay. They're both very powerful and influencing. I could see how they could shut you down. Can you discuss the role of vulnerability in mindful masculinity, and how do you embrace that, and how embracing it can transform your personal as well as your professional relationships? Because I think it's both.
Yes. Well, there is a way of being vulnerable in a boardroom, and there's a certain language, instead of saying, I feel scared, you might want to say, I feel concerned, and fill in the blank. But besides the language and fine tuning it, there's just so much pain that men hold inside their hearts and minds that comes out in distorted ways because of this cultural taboo. In fact, a lot of bullets and bombs are really tears that haven't been cried, that have been built up. So what happens when men can't be vulnerable is we turn to aggression against ourselves with a very harsh inner critic, or against countries or mates, parents. So it's tragic to me what this taboo has done. And it's fun because it takes a lot of courage for a man to step away from this conditioning and find their tears and their truth, and step away from what I call in the book the addiction to not feeling fear, to not admitting fear, to not owning fear. And once you stuff it down, it owns you. It owns you.
Yeah, I had someone say to me, and I can't remember the exact terminology, but basically, with all the violence and things that we're seeing excel in our society, we'll say if you walked into a jail or prison, every person you would meet is a wounded child. I think that's very striking if you shift your thought to when you read about these people or you start becoming judgmental, if you think there's another wounded child. It just gives you pause to shift that emotion.
Hmm. Ah,
In your work, you emphasize emotional intelligence a lot, and there's a lot
yes.
out there on emotional intelligence. What practices do you recommend for men to develop the skill?
Oh, reading my book just to be introduced to the intellectual idea of how important it is.
Sure, absolutely.
Wow. What else do I recommend? I recommend self-honesty to the max, getting in a men's group and getting support for being honest with yourself. I recommend abstinence from, it's funny because when I said abstinence, I had no idea what I was going to say. So it's like, oh, this is scary and exciting. I'm in the middle of the unknown. What do I want to say? Abstinence from, okay, here, from censorship.
Ooh, that's a biggie.
Most of us are so carefully guarded and so careful about what we say and express. And I think that we need to go through a period of, let's say, emotional sloppiness and just kind of get it all out. And then we can come to a balance where we guard our expression through discernment instead of fear.
Oh, that's nice.
But to get there, I think we have to go through a period of transparency that is really difficult for the average man, which is why the average man usually doesn't get around to reading books like this.
Well, that's interesting that you say that. And I'm going to guess if you have workshops and you're doing other work with this, I'm going to guess that you have more women sign up for it than you have men.
Yeah, that is true. So much so that and when you look at the reviews on Amazon, there is like 9-1 women writing the reviews.
Interesting.
So I said to my publisher, maybe we should change the subtitle from a book for men and the women who love them to a book for women and the men who want to keep them around.
Well,
Because that's how it's kind of turning out, is that the men are getting this book because their girlfriends or wives are saying, you better read this. This is really important for our relationship.
yeah.
And the subtext is, if you want to still have sex,
Yeah, absolutely.
read this book and we'll talk about every chapter.
Yeah.
And there's 50 chapters.
No, I listened to I don't know what I was listening to, some of your other work, and you discussed that a little more, well, I'll say graphically, but, not graphically. Yeah.
It's graphic.
So that being said, and
Golly.
you've just done it a couple of times here, it really is an innate part of who you are. How does integrating the humor into the discussion about masculinity aid in addressing these sensitive topics and fostering open dialogue? And do you have an example that you give? Like, we've tiptoed around it, we've touched it, but I've just watched you do it 3 times, and you do it really well. Your delivery is great. Not that we talked about anything sensitive.
Tell me what I do. Please enlighten me.
It gave you, you used it as a moment to give yourself a moment of pause to think about what you wanted to say. So you distracted in a way that kept me engaged as you were thinking about what you wanted to speak next. Your mind must be able to do 2 things at once. I can't do that.
Yes.
That would be one of the examples that I could give you. But it's almost like it's the intro it's your hook. It's the hook that you use as the intro. And then you've got my attention, and then you shift into the topic. That's what I've noticed.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. We're all inundated with information and with education. There's just so much of it going on. I think most of us have information overload, and what we come alive with, I come alive when I hear somebody being authentic, when they're in the moment, when I know they're not prepared. And I just like, okay, that's worth giving my time and attention to.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't think of like having an approach or a strategy. I don't like think that way. But if I did, I would say my approach is to lead with my own vulnerability, with my own story,
Okay.
because I've been there and I've done that. I've done most things.
Mm-hmm.
Share a little bit about my story, sometimes in song or poetry, which adds that, hey, we're gonna be entertained here, creates a lot of safety.
Yeah.
And and there are some cases where I'm able to combine being vulnerable with being an entertainer. And I'd love to give your audience an example of that.
I would love that.
There's this critical voice that has run my life. It's been my minister. I'm in the process of firing it as my minister, taking it off the stage. Yeah, it's just a little while.
It's taken a while, huh?
Just a few years. I call it my ultimate addiction. Like all the other addictions I've dabbled in have been to get relief from this critical voice. I just see that as very prevalent in our society. And I consider that critical voice to be a masculine wound, because the original innocence is you are lovable just for being alive. Your worth is given to you by God. It's not God or life or love, whatever you want to words you use. It's just not debatable. It's not, there's no conditions on it. However, we grow up into a world where people start to give you the messages that you're not okay as you are. But if you use your masculine strength and carve out a place for you in the world by taking, actions that prove your masculinity, then you could feel good about yourself someday. And everybody has their conditions on what that day might look like. It may be getting married. It may be making a certain amount of money. It may be finishing graduate school. It may, whatever it is, the message, I'm not enough until I do this, is pretty prevalent in our society. There never comes a point where you are enough. Once you get really good at this I'm not enough thing, you never have satisfaction. It becomes the addiction. So I write about it as the spiritual Dr. Seuss. This is my altered ego. It's an excuse I have to dispense wisdom in humor and entertainment. So here's a little taste of it. The critic, meaning your inner critic, will travel with you on this earth and be your companion for worse or worse. It pretends it's your friend, your bestest amigo, and it pours on the guilt. That's the beverage of ego. It's there to protect you, to help you feel strong. So it has to remind you you've done it all wrong. You're weak and you're lazy and you don't have a clue. That's your drill sergeant critic trying to motivate you. Your critic wants you to be all you can be, so it gives you these pep talks all day and for free. Oh, the places you'll go and the guilt trips you'll travel as the ego plays judge and bangs down on its gavel. But you always can get some relief from your shame by projecting it onto the others you'll blame. For that is the critic at its beastiest best. It nurses its grievances close to its chest. Republicans, liberals, your parents, your the world is just teeming with folks to correct. If only those fools could conform to your ways, you could get on with life without further delays. Now, I can go on and on. It's a 7-minute poem, but let's stop there. Give you a chance to.
That's pretty powerful.
Yeah,
That's pretty powerful. And it's pretty succinct. It says it all.
exactly.
You mentioned that you've personally been involved in men's work and inner child work yourself. How would you say these practices contributed to cultivating mindful masculinity?
The practices, inner child work, mindful masculinity. There is a connection. I like to say that getting really super honest with myself emotionally has put me from my head into my body. The body doesn't lie. So there's a certain, I would say, masculine edge in becoming this kind of emotionally honest with yourself and with others. It's brave. And what do men do when they want to prove their masculinity? They go out and they start wars or they fight to protect their countries and their whatever. And the same energy of courage that it takes to risk your life on the battlefield is the same energy that you learn to harness when learning to be honest with yourself and others. It takes a lot of courage, and you have to go beyond just judging yourself. It's not just like, oh, I realize how lazy and insecure I am, because those are judgments. They're not honesty. Those are your interpretations of what you think you're doing. I'm talking about honesty, like what a video camera would pick up, rather than what you're thinking you're doing or not doing. There's a spiritual person in India named Krishnamurti who said the ability to distinguish, to separate your interpretations from what a video camera would pick up, meaning from what reality you're interpreting, is the hardest step to take in the evolution of human intelligence.
Yeah.
To distinguish the difference between how you're interpreting reality and the actual experience of what's going on.
That's interesting because, you know this. You can be in a situation and four different people will describe that exact situation very, very differently based on their personal experiences and their belief system.
Yes.
So, yeah, that's pretty powerful.
One of the keys is to report what's going on in your body or even in your mind. Like, I'm feeling a contraction in my belly, and I notice that my breath is rather shallow. And I'm telling myself that there is danger here and that I need to pick up the pace or I'm going to lose people. That's actually true. There's a part of me going, we're not being funny enough. We're not being whatever enough.
Yeah.
So it's nice to tell the truth about that rather than to shapeshift into that.
So when you said that, the not being funny enough and the feelings with that, there were recently Matthew Perry from Friends transitioned, and I think they did the 10-year reunion, which I haven't watched, but I would like to watch at some point. But I did see some clips with it, and I watched him talking about how he came to the set and he was just so much anxiety because he felt he couldn't be funny enough. He wouldn't be funny enough. He really was very vulnerable in that, and it was shocking to watch the response of his castmates who were brokenhearted that that's what he was thinking, because they didn't have a sense of really the pain and worries and anxieties he was going through because he covered it so well, and he covered it with his humor. So very similar to exactly what you're talking about. And I'm sure there's a lot of you folks out there.
Most people in show business, we're all like teaching what we need to learn. And it's an interesting business, show business. It comes from both a talent that needs to be developed, but also a wound that, if acknowledged, becomes a superpower. And the wound is, I'm not enough. I have to be someone else. I have to put on a show. I have to pretend to be somebody else. And then I will have that boost of self-esteem. But I don't get that self-esteem can come from being authentic it seems to come from being entertaining or being different than myself. It's almost like in childhood, most entertainers and actors somehow figured out that being themselves didn't work, didn't get their needs met. So they came up with different ways to shape shift. It got that love or that approval.
So what would you say about turning inward? That's a lot of external. I mean, you've already touched on some of those. So looking for the external validation versus transitioning into that internal validation. That's part of the journey.
Well, it is for me, certainly my client. It's looking for love in all the wrong places outside of yourself. And then going, God, what is my inner voice saying to me that's causing me to look outside? What is the dialogue, the conversation that's pretty much 24/7 that is so familiar to me? It's like a fish trying to talk about water. And most people realize that water is not very loving and gentle and allowing and accepting.
Interesting.
It's you're like submerged in this inner critic. And when you get a taste of that, then you get a taste of how much you want out of that water. And you start going on an inner journey, realizing that the right woman, the right amount of income, all that fame, praise, and glory isn't going to get you anywhere. It's just going to continue the madness of trying to find who you are in other people or in external influences. And as I say that, I feel sad, partly my own sadness of how much my life has been about looking outside myself, and partly just looking out and seeing that as a theme that holds people back from joy out there in the world.
Thank you for being able to be vulnerable and to honestly
I can't hear you. Can you speak a little louder? Yeah.
That's right. I do that, right? We talked about that. And that's one of the things that I do, right? Anyways, we'll move past that one. Thank you truly for being vulnerable, but also putting yourself out there and modeling this behavior publicly for all that are going to watch this and listen to it.
Yeah. Are we in public?
We will be eventually.
Oh my God. Let me take all that back. I'm just this really cool guy who knows everything about everything and displays this incredible wisdom.
There you go.
Buy my books.
Yeah. So
I am perfect.
So since you're perfect, what advice would you have for women who wish to support the men in their lives on their journey to mindful masculinity? And I was listening to some of your work, and I felt that this could really become a double-edged sword for men. You want to talk about that a little bit? Does that make sense to you?
No. I'd like you to explain what a double-edged sword means in your metaphor here.
So what you talked about, and when I heard you say it, I thought, boy, that's the truth, is that women want their men to be vulnerable. They want them to be open. But yet, at the same time, they want them to be all those other things and protect and, do all of these things. Mm-hmm. So that could end up causing that fellow who's working on their masculinity and their vulnerability to lose that relationship, because the woman may decide that's not really what she wanted. Like, she liked that other masculine side of him that society created.
Well, it's confusing for both sexes, and it's been confusing since the 60s when men started to open up to their feminine side. Women have been like, oh, that's what I wanted, but wait a second.
Exactly.
And, we're in such a period of rapid change, evolution, that it's got to be messy. It's definitely imperfect. It's sloppy. And where we're going with it if we keep going, is balance and having a masculine and feminine side to be able to navigate between the two rather than just be in your vulnerability or just be in the protector. It's like that's where we're going. We want both sides of the brain working together.
And honestly, we were talking about the masculinity in men, but it really applies to women also, because we are created with both a masculine and a feminine side. Historically, one tends to be more dominant than the other, even for women. That's a good point you bring up. And actually, that was my next question is, how can men balance societal expectations with their authentic selves in a pursuit of mindful masculinity? I think finding that balance is a lot of work.
God, you have the questions. Well, yes. And that's what people like you and I, coaches, therapists, counselors, are helping men and women do. Like, we need help. It's not something you can do on your own. It's not like, let's read the book and just get into the program. It's, you got to get really down on your knees and be humbled by the failure of your plan, your life, like, things have to fail before you get vulnerable enough to say, I need help. This is more true for men than women. So usually I don't see men until they're very humble and they wouldn't even pick up the book, let alone read it, unless they've been humbled by their life experiences. So failure, divorce, bankruptcy, addiction, recovery, all of that, it's almost like a prerequisite for seeking balance between your male and your feminine side.
And I think that you bring up an important point. It is something, and it's something that men or humans in general have a hard time doing, is asking for help. Is that it would be I'm not saying it's impossible, because I feel like nothing's impossible, but it would be a hard journey to walk and get to a place that you're looking for by yourself without the assistance of others.
Indeed. Yeah. What's beautiful about that, it's a truth. It's so different than the way we have had role models in the movies and in our culture of men going it alone.
What a disservice.
John Wayne, the loners. That brings people to their addictions and to their needs. And when they're on their knees, I meant to say knees, not needs, but it's probably true both ways. But when they're on their knees, they get into the 12 steps of recovery, or they see a coach or a therapist, and they realize, I cannot heal, fix, change myself without a support system. There is no going it alone. It's a myth.
Yes, I would agree. What impact do you hope mindful masculinity will have on both men and women?
The impact is already happening. It's touching your heart with, like, oh my God, this guy, Scott Grace, his life experience as he shares it so generously in this book is making me realize that I have a lot of tears that I haven't cried, a lot of laughter that I haven't laughed, a lot of life that I haven't lived. And it's inspiring me to, let's say for a woman, to talk to my man about difficult things. It's just, the book speaks for itself. And as you know, the Audible copy comes with over 3 hours of my songs. And the songs take the messages that could be considered somewhat left brain concepts, and they take them from the left and plant them into the right side of the brain, where they can grow and be nurtured. And they touch you in ways that words cannot touch you. Wanna let life touch me? Wanna let life move me deep. Wanna let life stir me from an ancient sleep. Wanna let life touch me. Wanna let life move me deep. Wanna let life stir me from an ancient sleep. May I laugh all my laughter, may I cry all my tears. May I love the rain as deeply as the sun when it clears. May I laugh all my laughter, may I cry all my tears. Love the rain as deeply as the sun when it clears. Now that's about as much as I'd like to sing from that song. But what strikes me as I sing about it is I'm not teaching men or anyone to get in touch with their laughter or their tears. There's no methodology for that. All I can do is inspire by sharing my longing, by sharing, like filleting myself open and sharing how much I want this for myself and others. That's what the song is. It's a prayer. May I laugh all my laughter. May I cry all my tears. Not one or the other. Not like I just want to be positive. I just want to be happy. God, that holds people back. Got to have both. It's a planet of contrast. And once you start saying, I just want the good stuff, you lose aliveness and life.
Yeah. So how do you envision the future of masculinity evolving, especially with a growing emphasis on mindfulness and emotional awareness? They really are hitting the mainstream, those two concepts, and you don't do such a beautiful job of bringing them into masculinity.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. First of all, like we're seeing both evolution and transformation into more unified field of masculine, feminine. All of that is happening. And at the same time, there's like a relapse. There's people who are so triggered by how quickly things are moving that they want to return to the good old days when men were men and women were women. When Archie Bunker used to say, and you knew where you were then, girls were girls and men were men. So we're seeing both expansion and contraction. And that's just so natural. It's not a big deal. It's just part of the movement of humanity. And so you get to choose from the buffet. There's going to be pockets and maybe even whole cultures of people that want the good old days and who are trying to move things backwards. And then there's going to be people all over the planet opening up the best of times, the worst of times. What was that book? It started with the sentence, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Charles Dickens' Great Expectations, or A Tale of Two Cities. And so we're like in a tale of two cities right now. One city is immersed in fear, and the other city, just on the other side of the river, is immersed in love and opening and expansion and courage and change, progress.
That's a fact.
Isn't it true? And both are sharing the same planet.
Yep.
So what I see is, in the future, there's going to be more oil and water separating. There's going to be more separation between these two ways of experiencing life. And there will come a time where you just won't even see the other world. It just won't register.
I totally agree with that. What role does spirituality play in redefining masculinity according to your experiences and teachings?
Yeah, spirituality is a must, because men, as Bob Dylan said, you got to serve somebody. And if you are not connected to a spiritual purpose, something that's beyond your ego's preferences, desires, and addictions for fame, glory, relationship glory, sex glory, the glory of 6 and 7 and 8-figure incomes. If you're looking for glory outside yourself, you are going to go through a pretty hard time. Now, I completely forgot what the question was and where I was going. Can you help me, Dr. Sandra? Where was I going with all this?
Absolutely. Yes. How do you see how spirituality interacts with...
Okay. So spirituality is whatever it takes to get you into a higher calling, a higher purpose than just gratification of your own ego needs. So that could be getting into a spiritual practice, yoga, meditation, finding out that there's something outside of the noise, the turbulence of your mind that makes you tick. There is the purpose of life, is finding out who you are. And then that can translate into a million different things. But what it usually translates into is finding something in the world that calls you to improve upon, to change. And it could be related to your own wounds. Like, okay, I was abandoned as a child. I want to adopt children. I want to create a safe space for children. So it could be based on your own wounds. It could be that you look around and you just see something that calls you to bring light, some dark part of humanity that is needing light that you feel drawn to shed light upon, to bring solutions where there's not. That's a spiritual thing. You may not even frame it as a spiritual thing. You may just feel it.
Yeah.
And you don't have to believe in God. That's ridiculous. God doesn't care if you believe in her or not. Those are just words.
Yeah. We're into labeling so much. And sometimes I don't think we need to give it a name. But at what point you considered yourself an atheist? And then,
Yes.
as we grow and transition, you move down a different path. Can you just touch real quick on that? Because I'm sure there's folks out there that are curious about that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was raised by two very intellectually parents who felt like intelligence was their God, science. My father was a doctor. They both were pretty atheist. It's funny, I spoke to my mother about 2 hours ago, and she's 96, and we talked about death. And we talk about death a lot. I'm the one kid in the family who doesn't shy away from talking about it. And I said, Mom, if you, by chance, go through the dying experience and find that there's still awareness, that that this thing called you is still existing, I want you to come to me. Visit me at night, visit me anytime. Come to me and say 3 magic words that my ego has been trying to hear for a lifetime. Scott, you were right. And we had a good laugh about that.
Okay, and won't you be surprised when she does it?
Yeah, well, I won't. But it was psychedelics that opened me up to something more than what my parents taught me was real. What people call plant medicine nowadays really changed my world. It rocked my world.
Oh, I've had so many testimonies about that. Awesome. So in addition to your books, what other projects are you involved in, and are you still working with the public? If so, how do they contact you? What does that look like for someone?
Yeah, I'm not a very passionate, big dreams kind of guy. I'm more like, I live in central Mexico and my life is pretty simple. And I don't like to spend a lot of time on the computer. So I don't have, at this moment in time, things to offer in groups, but I do one-on-one coaching, healing work, tapping. I create songs for people to give as gifts.
Oh, that's awesome.
To other people. So they can go to my website, read all about what my offerings are, scottsongs.com. ScottSongs.com. People can find me on Facebook, Scott K. Grace, my middle initial. And I'm pretty prolific on YouTube. And they can look at my playlists and see that there's a spiritual Dr. Seuss, there's the conscious comedian, there's the serious stuff as well.
Okay.
So I'm out there.
So you have a lot of stuff out there. I love that you sort of are hunkering in there. I've talked to so many people who seem to be moving away from the mainstream and our electronic world for a couple hot minutes here.
Yes.
Is there anything next for you? Do you have something next for Scott? It may not be work, could be personal, or could just be hanging out with the margarita. I don't know.
I would say margarita. I would say I don't know what's next.
Okay.
And it's very exciting. Most of my life, I've had dreams and goals and visions of what I wanted. Now I'm like, I don't have a clue what's next. I just know that life is building inside me. The desire to give and pass myself on to mentor, that's really strong in me. But somebody was trying to coach me recently on how to develop a niche because there's so many sides of myself. She's like, you got to choose one, lead with it. People have to know you as the conscious comedian or the author or the mindful masculinity specialist. And I said, no, thank you. No, I don't care that that's the way that marketing happens for most people in the world. It's not for me.
Okay.
I make enough money to live in Mexico, especially. And I don't feel like I want to be drawn by reaching more people or making more money.
I love it. That's beautiful.
I want to be drawn by my joy.
I love it.
I want joy to be a magnet that pulls me in. I don't know what that looks like next. I don't.
So I have to ask you that, like, not really sure knowing why I'm here, what I'm doing, but this is what I'm supposed to be doing, where it goes, who knows? Don't you find an incredible sense of peace with that?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And I wouldn't have said that when I was in college trying to decide a major.
Oh, God, no. Yeah.
That was, I would not recommend this to young people. But for those of us who've been around the block, it can be incredibly freeing to say, I don't know where I'm going and I don't really care. You know that poem that I read you about the critic? The end of it expresses that, where the critic takes a break and you just open up to love and peace. There's a line that says, towards the end, it says, your old superstitions have gone up in smoke. Like you can't rest in peace until after you croak. You no longer fear death, or for that matter, life, because you know that all matters are gift wrapped in light. While resting in peace, you will soon be inspired to go out in the world with some newfound desires that spring from your heart and your soul. And wherever they take you, you're going there whole. Because the critic is now in the passenger seat. It lets down the window and takes in the treats. Where you are going, you don't need to know. Because the journey's as rich as the places you'll go.
Oh, man. I have chills, literally chills. So we're pretty much of the same age group. And I have to tell you, that's been an epiphany of mine over the last more recent years. And it's just such a freeing, beautiful feeling. So it was fun to listen to you share that. And I think that other people need to hear that that's like, okay.
Oh, I love it. Something just came to me, a little rhyme, that in my earlier incarnation, I was chasing thrills. And now what I'm chasing is chills. Like you said, I got chills listening to it. I thought, that's what I live for, is putting myself in situations where I get chills and where I give chills.
Oh my God, you are such an awesome poet. Thank you for taking my words and making them so elegant and meaningful. That's beautiful.
Could we end with a song that puts your words?
That would be perfect.
Dr. Sandra Marie has set the poet free to express himself liberally. What am I going to sing? I don't know. I have no idea. I just trust the flow. Oh, the flow is a river that always delivers me from pain to chills. I don't have to chase those thrills, 'cause it's chills from the heart that satisfy myself. Dr. Sandra and me know what is good for our health is get those chills, those peak moments where you can't just think about them. Thinking is not your friend if it's the only game in town. But when you take a look around your anatomy, your heart sets you free.
Oh, thank you, sir. That was beautiful. Scott, it has truly, truly been a joy. Just thank you for everything that you're doing. You're doing so much. Thank you. You're making such a difference. And for all our listeners out there, I always want to thank you for taking time out of your day to join Scott and I. And remember, embrace that wild soul. Until next time, thanks, Scott.
My pleasure. Dr. Sandra, anytime. I'm here for you and for your listeners.
Awesome.
That's what I do.
It is what you do.
Because it gives me chills and maybe a few thrills. It keeps me away from pills.
There you go.
And it's definitely no frills.
Ooh. Beautiful.
Aww.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Wild Soul Gatherings Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious. To learn more about our guests, please go to our website, wildsoulsgathering.com. We're very eager to hear from our listeners what you thought of the episode, topics you might like us to cover in the future, your thoughts on spirituality, questions you may have. Please feel free to send us an email at wildsoulsgathering@gmail.com. This is your host, Dr. Sandra Marie, sending each of you peace and love. Until we meet again, embrace your wild soul.